Tonight, let us talk now live to Sir Craig Oliver, former BBC editor, of course, but also Director of Politics and Communications for the Prime Minister, David Cameron, when he was in Number 10. Morning to you, Sir Craig.
Good morning.
I suppose the first place to start, actually, is where we ended with Sam Nunberg, that figure. I mean, they're obviously not going to pay billions of dollars or pounds or whatever, but if there is to be a settlement, even that would be eye-wateringly difficult for the BBC, wouldn't it?
Yes, I think it is a nightmare situation for the BBC. It does clearly believe that it's got a strong case, but really the problem is that public money could be spent or is going to be spent fighting this or settling this. But I think that the even bigger problem than that, and perhaps more importantly, is that the reputation of the BBC is continuing to take major hits. And if you watch the GB News interview, which happened overnight, the BBC is being positioned by people who wish to do it real harm as a political actor that is willing to manipulate the truth. Trump says on GB News, it's worse than fake news, it's corrupt. And he also raises the prospect of going through the archive to find further examples. In other words, it's open season on the BBC. So I think for several reasons, this is deeply problematic.
I wonder, though, whether that, in a sense, plays to what the BBC seemed to be saying when all of this first broke, which is, yes, it's open season on the BBC, from the BBC's enemies, the Daily Telegraph, now Donald Trump. And actually, in a way, and there'll be plenty of Americans who buy into this and who trust and like the BBC, actually, this is a fight the BBC could position it for truth and journalistic decency against other forces. And albeit that the BBC gets things wrong and admitted in this case that it got something wrong, the idea of obliterating the BBC is not one that would play well with an awful lot of people, not just in this country.
Well, what's really interesting is when you watch the GB News interview, it's pretty clear Donald Trump doesn't understand the BBC, how it's funded, how it works. And it really is considered, I think, when he's talking about it, sort of this minor irritation that's on the side, and he feels that he has to fight because they've reduced his reputation and that kind of thing. I don't think what you're suggesting works. One, because the BBC has accepted that it got it wrong. And then secondly, it does not, as an impartial news organisation, want to be in a situation where it's clearly in one camp against another camp. And I think that's the real problem here. Is a long time ago, the BBC needed to have neutralised this. It should have dealt with this months ago, and it certainly should have dealt with it 10 days ago when the story was released to the Daily Telegraph. Instead, a vacuum was created, and this has become a textbook, casebook example of what happens when you allow, as a major organisation, a vacuum to exist and for others to fill it and to cause trouble for you.
Do you think Keir Starmer can help? Because they're going to talk over the weekend, aren't they? That's what we're told.
I think he can, and I think that Keir Starmer obviously has a good relationship with Donald Trump, and following on from the state visit, that kind of thing. It's been a real positive in terms of foreign affairs relationship with the United States. The problem is that the BBC is relying on the Prime Minister to expend political capital to save its bacon. And I think that, again, is another problem for the BBC. It's like we are literally having to rely on the Prime Minister to try and take some of the heat out of the situation when we should have dealt with this much, much earlier.
We've got to the end of a week in which all of this has swirled around, and of course it's not just about Donald Trump. There are other things in the original memo, Michael Prescott's memo that was leaked to the Daily Telegraph. I mean, you've made it plain that you think it's all very serious. Serious enough that this is an existential crisis, do you think?
I think it is bordering on the existential for the BBC. It's in the run-up to the Charter renewal, which is essentially deciding the terms on which the BBC is funded and how it operates. I think that the real danger for the BBC is in the run-up to that period, and indeed the next election, which is a number of years away, is that the BBC becomes a political football. It stands and falls on being an impartial organisation, the ability to hold the ring in a debate. And when it is positioned as a political actor and seen as having a role in that fight, that is deeply problematic for the BBC. It needs to do whatever it can to get this over with quickly, cleanly, and to move back to a position where it is seen as an impartial observer event.
I mean, it's one thing to give that advice, isn't it? But it's another thing to work out how it does that now.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, look, we wouldn't have started here, would we? The BBC is also going to have a parliamentary select committee hearing on the 24th of this month, and the chair of the BBC Board of Governors and Robbie Gibb, who's been brought into this and accused of all sorts of conspiratorial things, it's going to run as a story. And I can't emphasize enough that in the modern world, when you are a major organisation, institutional business, and you have a crisis, you need to deal with it quickly. You cannot take time and allow vacuums to be created, because then you end up in the situation where, as you say, it's almost impossible to deal with this without taking further damage.
Sir Craig Oliver, thank you.